All right, guys, webcast has started.
You are on.
All right, let's get this started. I see people flowing in the attendees now. So welcome everyone to Mornings with Planning, a webinar hosted the first Wednesday of every month where the Lexington Division of Planning discusses new ways to reconnect, reimagine, and respond in a new reality. These webinars are held live via Zoom and on Lex TV. And this is also being recorded for later viewing at imaginelexington.com, on Lex TV's YouTube channel, and on Saturday at 1 p.m. on Lex TV. This webinar is eligible for AICP credit, which is excellent if you're seeking that. My name is Lauren Weaver, GISP and Senior Planner with the Lexington Division of Planning, and I will be your moderator for today's August 4th, 2021 session. During this webinar, we will be discussing placemaking and placekeeping. So placemaking often seeks to redefine an evolving area, whereas placekeeping emphasizes the preservation of place and culture, and those two can go hand in hand. So kick back with your morning coffee or tea, and let's meet today's panelists. So we have 4 panelists today, including Michelle Kosieniak, Superintendent of Planning and Design with Lexington Parks and Recreation, Ryan Holmes, AICP and Principal and Planner with EHI Consultants, Josh Fain, JD and Executive Director with the Lexington Community Land Trust, and Sam Castro, AICP, Lead Accredited Professional for Neighborhood Development and Senior Planner with the Lexington Division of Planning. Panelists, as always, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm really looking forward to getting into this discussion. Let's start with just a little bit of an overview of your roles for the audience to get a better feel for you. And we'll start with Michelle. Michelle, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background in landscape architecture and your work with the parks, from design to community engagement for over 100 parks in Lexington.
Lauren, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Lex TV, we're getting reports that people cannot hear on Lex TV.
They should be able to hear now.
Cool, thank you.
We got it.
No problem for the interruption. Thank you for working out the tech stuff on the back end. For those of you who are watching and don't know, we have a whole crew of folk on the back end that are working to bring this to you today, from Q&A support and tech in the planning division and tech in Lex TV. So thanks for staying in contact and getting that working, y'all. All right, Michelle, back to you.
Thanks, Lauren. As I was introduced, I'm Michelle Kosieniak. I have been with, I'm a landscape architect, and I have been with the Division of Parks and Recreation for, I think, 24 years. And I absolutely love that there's 105 parks in Lexington. I couldn't be more proud of our community. Generations of people ahead of us were very thoughtful when they started planning Lexington, and it has resulted in a very rich fabric in our community.
That's great. All right, Ryan, let's introduce you a little bit better. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work with the Davis Park Master Plan and your experience with sustainable design and redevelopment strategies here in Lexington.
Yeah, so I'm Ryan Holmes with EHI Consultants, Principal and Urban Planner. I'm actually out of our Louisville office, but born and raised in Lexington, so it'll always be home to me. Again, I've been with the company since 2008. I'm very passionate about community engagement. I'll probably sound like a broken record at some point, talk about getting residents involved in the planning process. But Davis Park it's one that's near and dear to us. I remember the first time I interned with the company. That's actually one of the very first projects I worked on back when it was still just a planning vision. And so it's not often you actually get to see your visions come into fruition. So I'm excited to talk about Davis Park and thankful to be a part of this panelist.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right, Josh, let's continue to you. And so you have some experience with Davis Park from your work in the Lexington Community Land Trust, which is a wonderful organization, and a huge amount of background in housing and homelessness. Can you fill us in a little bit on your background? Oh, uh-oh. I think we might have a sound. I see that you're muted. I'm going to try and ask you to unmute and see if that gives you a pop-up. Sorry, audience, hang tight while we figure this out. There are always challenges in life. Sometimes they're technical. Libby, are you able to unmute Josh?
I can ask him to unmute, but I cannot unmute him.
Oh,
okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go.
No problem. No problem. Welcome back.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties here. So I am Josh Fain. I'm the executive director of the Lexington Community Land Trust. I've only been on board since December 1st of 2020. So relatively new to the position, but also came in during the COVID times, which is always interesting. But although new to the land trust, I'm certainly not new to housing or nonprofit work. So I'd spent 14 years as a staff attorney at Legal Aid the Bluegrass. And for the first 10 of those, I was our main housing attorney. So representing tenants in eviction cases and, from 08 to 12, representing a lot of homeowners in foreclosure cases. And so I actually was born and raised here in Lexington. I grew up in generational poverty. I grew up in the neighborhood right up the street from what is now the Distillery District. So, those were all vacant and abandoned buildings when I was growing up. And so not very far from the community I work in now, previously Davis Bottom, now Davis Park. And so obviously the Lexington Community Land Trust is a affordable housing nonprofit, and we seek to create permanently affordable housing. And so I would say we have three missions. One would be to create permanently affordable housing, but also to combat gentrification and also some of the impacts of redlining. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, and welcome aboard and back to your work in Lexington. That's wonderful. Yeah. All right, Sam, let's continue on to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in LEED for neighborhood design? And then you have a huge amount of background in small area plans, which kind of intrinsically involves some placemaking and placekeeping.
Yeah, I've been with the city for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I worked for a consulting firm here in town and actually got to team up with Ryan on 3 small area plans in Lexington. And so it's great being able to be on the original design and planning side of it, and now being on the implementation side, working with the city in long range. And I try and bring my, my background in both planning and urban design and landscape design, particularly LEED for neighborhood development, into our ideas of how we plan cities, particularly, this kind of, I don't want to say new notion of a 15-minute neighborhood, but how we can make more livable, walkable places for people.
Great. Great. All right. Well, thank you. And audience members, now you have a little bit better feel for our panelists. So we did get a bunch of questions with registration, and we've worked those into the questions. It'll guide our discussion. But if you're in attendance now and think of an additional question, feel free to submit those using the Q&A functionality, and we'll work those in if we can. All right. Well, let's get started. So we're just going to start with a kickoff question. And Ryan, if you want to kick us off, I think you might be an excellent kickoff for this one. So can you each give us an example of placemaking and placekeeping that you think is stellar?
So placemaking, I think the biggest example would be Davis Park. Again, it's something that's near and dear to my heart. It started as like Josh said, the Davis Bottoms. And so to see it actually become Davis Park now, seeing the transformation it's taken along. And actually you can see the site plan behind Josh on this wall. But I think that's a tremendous example of, leading with the residents and really getting their input on what they'd like to see. And we're moving towards the phase 2 development of things. Placekeeping, another neighborhood that's near and dear to my heart, is where I actually grew up, is the East End neighborhood. I grew up on Chestnut Street. And so now you're starting to see things like the Legacy Trail, the IMAG, the Met development, and you see all these new developments, but it's still being culturally sensitive to the residents that are there. So I think those are two big examples of placekeeping versus placekept.
Those are great. Thank you. Thank you. Does somebody else want to take the reins for this next one? Sam, go for it.
I was going to say this is kind of a plug for some stuff happening in town, but in terms of placemaking, I think that the city is trying to do a really good job, and unfortunately COVID, had its backfalls of, creating these spaces downtown where we can hold big festivals, particularly the Latino Festival and Pride, which is coming up. They moved it from the summer to the fall. So hopefully we can still keep going with that. But I think, so that's an example of placemaking, but placekeeping is the fact that I was reading somewhere that Lexington is known as a small but fierce gay mecca for Kentucky. And so, over time, these bars and restaurants and stuff particularly along Main and Limestone, have created this safe space, this gay-friendly atmosphere that is a place that is kept, that's been there intrinsically for quite some time, and that has then spawned a place for Pride Festival to happen once a year.
That's great. Thank you. Josh, do you want to continue for us?
Yeah, unfortunately, Ryan stole my first answer, but obviously I would always tout the work that we're doing and that lots of folks are doing down in this community. And so it always amazes me how many folks that I talk to and interact with that aren't from this community, but speak of their time here. And so previously there was a roughly 5-acre park, South End Park, in our community. And, I was talking to Dean Danny Murphy at the UK College of Law, who's not from Lexington, but remembers coming here as a child with his father and his uncles. They used to host giant softball tournaments here. So, that park is something that we're working to put back, and it'll be complete by the end of next year. But a key point of, I think, all of this is that, the evolution in the public insight. I think originally the park was going to have a baseball park in it to kind of bring that back. And so, but as things have changed and as the process has evolved in time, I think the wants and the needs of the community may have changed. So I'm not sure if that's will end up in the park again or not. And that's a good thing, because as you evolve and move and build things, it's what's needed for the community moving forward. So certainly I would say our community, and I think there's other things that we are working on that will hopefully be more official in the very near future, that will serve as a destination. Our community will. So as far as the placekeeping, I would think the Southland Road corridor is a pretty good example of that. It's kept the fabric of that community, and has brought folks in. Obviously, you've got the SCAPA program there at Lafayette right down the road, and the arts and some of the public artwork that's been on display and different things. It's a wonderful community, I think. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll get more into what you've mentioned there with like keeping and continuing to evolve as neighborhoods change as we move forward in the questions today. Michelle, can you wrap us up on this one? I think the work that you're doing in parks is great. So
Yeah, it's extremely challenging to have so many parks. As I alluded to, it creates this wonderful fabric in our city, but remembering that each space is unique and each space is has the potential to tell a story. And with being one individual, I can't possibly know those stories. And so, as some of the other panelists have alluded to, it becomes very resident dependent on sharing those stories and sharing those attachments to the space in order to decide. And really, it's their lens that I try to look through when deciding if place making is appropriate or placekeeping is appropriate, or some combination of the two. There have been instances when I have approached a park, and because of maybe a particular historic element in the park, I thought, I assumed, which we should never do, that was of value, and come to learn that really wasn't to the residents. And so you have to sort of readjust and try to go in, set your own sort of biases aside in your own lens, and really listen and assess how the residents are viewing, because you have to translate their vision in order to create that value for them.
yeah, that's well said. So every place is a little bit different, and the intention that goes into that really determines what makes it placemaking or placekeeping. All right, thank you all. Thank you all. Let's continue into the Meteor questions. I think Sam and Ryan might be good for kicking off this one. But of course, panelists, if you want to interject anything, please feel free to just jump in. The discussion is the most valuable part. The questions are just a guide to facilitate that discussion. So Sam, maybe start us off on how do you identify opportunities for placemaking versus areas that already exist for placekeeping? We already talked about that a little bit, but how do you decide which way to go, or both?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think Michelle kind of alluded to it already, and Ryan a bit too. It is all about listening to the people that live there, engaging the neighborhood and the people that are actually going to use it. As planners and designers, one of the best and kind of low tech exercises that we do is what we call a dot exercise. And so we just ask people on a map to show where they live, work, and play. And particularly the play aspect becomes really important in this idea of placekeeping. So, like when we did the Cardinal Valley Small Area Plan, there are a lot of residents that it's a fairly dense area around there. A lot of people live in apartments and stuff. And so they really, really heavily use the park that's in there and the library. And so those also become sort of de facto community centers and community gathering places. And like Michelle was saying, you have to go in without these assumptions. One of the things, like, there are some tennis courts in Valley Park there that you're like, well, I don't really see anybody playing tennis there. Well, no, they don't play tennis there, but the large Latin community that's around there plays a heck of a lot of speed soccer in there. And that's stuff you would never know unless you ask them. And so, your gut reaction might be to say, like, okay, well, let's take away this, these tennis courts because you guys aren't playing tennis. But you just dig a little deeper and it's like, oh, you actually might need more courts for the thing that you're actually using it for. So it's really about going there and figuring out, what do you all need, instead of, I think especially we have to be careful as white planners and designers to not go into spaces of people of color and say, hey, I would like to basically whitewash this space for you and make it very generic feeling. Like, no, I need to know what you are using it for. So if you're using it for family reunions and picnics, and you have these, we have grills and stuff, and you want to use them for that, then me putting in more pretty trees and stuff like that, that's not going to help you. That's not what you are asking to use that space for. So anyway, my ramble over.
That's a great ramble. Thank you for that. Ryan, do you want to continue with this question?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what Sam mentioned in as far as kind of studying that public life and people interacting in their natural state of space. And so, you know, what we like to do is literally just go out and watch how people are using their spaces, and that'll tell you a lot. You don't have to interact with them; just kind of watch them and see how they move in their neighborhoods. And so, once you do that, then you can start to have those conversations and say, "Hey, what does this building mean to you?" And you know, one building that comes to mind is the Charles Young Center. And so, as you see the development going around in the East End, at one point, you know, there was discussions of should we tear down the Charles Young Center and make it something else. But if you ask the residents who grew up there, you know, I grew up there playing basketball. I used the park to learn how to play baseball. And that Charles Young Center means something more than just the physical walls itself. So sure, you could build a state-of-the-art facility, but that doesn't hold the same weight. And so once you talk to those residents and have those genuine conversations and be willing to listen and accept that you don't know everything about this neighborhood that you think you may have, and it goes back to breaking down those preconceived notions you may have. And so you have to listen to the residents. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might be getting my wires crossed here, but Michelle, do I remember that there are some changes to that area right now? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you balance that like sense of place and culture and community stories and history while adapting to a changing landscape and upgrading facilities, ideally, so that people can continue to use those spaces and continue to learn how to play baseball. It's I like picturing like little, I guess you're an adult now, but like little versions of us using parks as children.
Yeah, so we are immersed deeply right now at Charles Young. I was, in fact, I know I haven't stopped learning since we started this project. 105 parks, I normally, when I really engage with the space for the first time for a meaningful project, I'll do a little background. For example, I didn't know all the things I now know about Colonel Charles Young. I'm not from the East End, so I had a lot to learn, and it has been an amazing journey. And I am so thankful to the East End residents that have opened up to us. I will say that was, to Sam's point, I'm not from the East End, and I don't look like a lot of the residents there. And so there was a little bit of, a barrier that we had to break down. They had to, I had to earn their trust that I was listening, that I was hearing them. And it has to be okay when, I obviously went in with an agenda of my job was to build a new playground. So that was my task. But when we engaged, my team and I, when we engaged, we found people wanted to talk about safety. People wanted to talk about, homelessness. They wanted to talk about preserving the center, to Ryan's point. And you have to just say, okay, well, we'll just set aside the playground for a minute and we'll listen, because all of those things, if you stop and think about it, really relate back to the playground. It can't be successful if we don't address those other things as well. I'd like to interject too, that one of the things that I find amazing in the course of my career is that when I started my career, we listened to the residents, but we were very, I think the industry in general was very hesitant to credential in their minds the residents and the people that were living in these spaces. In other words, we're planners, or landscape architects. We know how to do this, and you don't have a degree, so let us show you. And I love that whole script has been flipped. And my very favorite thing is that now I read some proposals, in fact, for the phase 2 at Charles Young. So phase 1 is the playground, ribbon cutting coming soon. Phase 2 to be announced soon. And we were reading some proposals for the design of that space. And one of them said they plan to add an East End resident on their team. And I am assuming they mean a paid individual. So for years, we have utilized these community resources, meaning the people that live there, as experts. They are subject matter experts, and there's a lot of them in the East End. I've had a couple of little, I would call them front porch moments, where in a bigger setting, I got to sit aside with, somebody who's lived in the East End for 50 or more years, or their whole life, and they're, in their 70s, and just listen to their stories, and it's amazing. But to recognize and value that expertise to the point that we pay those individuals to be subject matter experts as part of the planning team is so exciting to me. That is really, really exciting. And I think for building trust, that is an excellent step forward for immersing, if you have to bring in a team, that's not resident, that's definitely a better approach than just assuming that your team knows because of our credentials.
Yeah, those are really excellent points. I think you really hit on something there with the pay. I think it's a really big and destructive, for lack of a better word, challenge that the commissions and committees don't necessarily receive compensation. So then it does limit who can engage in those processes by quite a lot, along with like time of day and things like that. So it's really motivating and encouraging to see that happening, where people can be compensated for their opinions, which take a lifetime to form and back up, and then can better shape the fuller community too. So thank you for that. Josh, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your work in Davis Park and even perhaps the Distillery District. You mentioned that you grew up nearby, and it's seen a huge amount of change in just the past set of years. Maybe a little bit about how it is or is not possible to maintain a feeling of place when an area undergoes change. We know change is inevitable, but what does that look like? It's kind of a roundabout question, but
Yeah, absolutely. And so even when I was early on in this position, I had said, in a few years, we may be accused of gentrification, which certainly has a negative connotation. And that comes from the forced displacement. And what my point being when I said that is that folks will drive by our community as they drive by the Distillery District and others now, and see thriving communities where there once maybe was not. And so, but where we differ is this, that the devil's in the details. If you don't know that there was not forced displacement, and that not only were original residents not forced out of their homes and no longer able to afford to live in the communities, they have been brought back and they're living in much higher quality housing stock, and we're building amenities and truly building a community. It's not that it's easy to build just a neighborhood, but it's a heck of a lot harder to build a community. It's got to be something that from placemaking to placekeeping, it's things that you have to keep in mind from the beginning, and you have to think of both of them. It's not just one or the other, in my opinion. For it to be successful and sustainable long term, you've got to consider both aspects. And so we've got a phrase that we say around here a lot, and it's written on the wall across from me, but ask, align, and act, in that very specific order. And so myself included, I'm guilty of it, but sometimes we get in the habit of asking questions, just waiting to give our response, as opposed to truly listening to what the individual is saying and what the community wants. And so it's always key to really focus on what it is someone wants. And like some of the other panelists have hit on, I grew up in a very poor, predominantly white community, not far from this community. So it's easy for me to come in and say, well, I know what you're going through, and I know what you want, what's best for you. I can relate. And in some ways I can relate, but in lots of other ways I cannot. I didn't grow up in this community. I'm not a person of color. So it's essential for me to make sure that we're listening to the community and building the things that are, that they want and need. It's also essential to me that we're not, building things that are perpetuating the stereotypes of poverty. And so it's a balance on a lot of things. And so, just that sense of community is what I think is most important. And although it's more challenging, it's certainly not impossible. And it's not something that, it's just something you have to be cognizant of and aware of and pursue.
Thank you. Thank you. And maybe we can stay with Josh unless anybody else wants to hop in on that one. So Lexington is going to keep growing. We know this, the projections show that, and historically it's grown faster than average. And so our community is going to continue to evolve. And of course, we want to preserve, we want to place keep, but we also want to place make and find a good balance between that. So the question is, how do we create an inclusive and welcoming space for people who are new to the community without alienating or displacing the original community? How can we come like a better community, a wider community through these efforts? Josh, if you want to start us off on that one, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a delicate balance. I mean, certainly you take our community. We came about from the Newtown Pike extension, Oliver Lewis Way. And so, I think it's relatively inevitable that roads will need to be built, and often they're going to be near city centers downtown. And so, in a lot of ways, those will negatively impact predominantly African-American communities due to redlining and things that have occurred through generation after generation. So roads will always have to be built. It's just how we go about it. And so we certainly hope to serve as a national model for how to do that. Once again, by not displacing residents, by bringing folks back, by increasing the percentage of home ownership and the quality of the housing stock. And so I think it's just a conscious effort. And so once again, it's certainly easy to build and to plan things and to follow, bright line rules, but most things are not that situation. Everything is unique. Each community is unique, even communities that are close to one another. So once again, we're firm believers that by promoting home ownership and community involvement, for example, our board is 15 people, 5 of which are required to be a residence within our community. Currently, there are 6 of them that are residents. So, we've got a diverse group, and so trying to get as much buy-in from everybody. And so, once again, through home ownership and just community involvement, I think is a huge step forward.
Would anybody else like to weigh in on that topic of helping new members of the community feel welcomed while also maintaining the existing community?
Yeah, one example that comes to mind, it was a while ago, it was back during the Legacy Trail. We had a public meeting, and there was a lot of controversy of whether it should go down 3rd Street or whether it should go down 4th Street. We held a meeting at the Lyric Theater, which is another good example of that for reuse and bringing back those historic spaces for the residents who grew up going to that theater. But we had this meeting, and a lot of folks from UK, whether they're students or faculty, they said, hey, we ride. A lot of them came to the meeting, and so they, we ride. We love the Legacy Trail. It's a beautiful paved off trail. And so once we got to the urban aspects of the Legacy Trail, I distinctly remember one woman asking me, she said, why do we even have to come down 3rd or 4th Street? This seems kind of silly to me. And I asked her, I said, well, do you know who Isaac Murphy is? And the point of the Legacy Trail. And so once we got into that discussion, she was like, wow, this is really eye-opening. Now I get why we're doing this. And so it's one of those opportunities for people who would normally go through the East End to actually start to ride through this and start to learn about the history of why people are so passionate about the East End.
Would you mind to share a little bit more about that history with us now?
Yep, so for those who don't know Isaac Murphy, the Legacy Trail it's from his birthplace. And so you get the Isaac Murphy Memorial Art Garden down on the corner of Midland and East 3rd Street. And it goes out to his gravesite. And so that's the purpose of the Legacy Trail. And so he won the Kentucky Derby. African-American jockey, won the Kentucky Derby 3 times. So, he's considered one of the greatest jockeys of all time. And so it's a way to honor his legacy. And so that's literally the reason why we call it the Legacy Trail.
I love it. I love it. I didn't know that history. So thank you for that education. Yeah, that's really great. Anybody else want to jump in on this one before we continue? Michelle, I saw you unmuting a bit ago. Go ahead.
Yep. So I just, when I thought about, when I was listening and thinking about that, from a public park design standpoint, which I would assume applies to any public space, really it's not, the basic tenets of good design apply to not only new visitors, but they apply to frequent visitors as well. And really for us, I don't think you can achieve much unless you check these boxes. It has to be safe. It has to feel safe. It has to be clean. Cleanliness, meaning trash, graffiti, those are signs that someone doesn't care. And if they don't care about the space, they don't care about you. And so those are things that we don't even think about as we move through public space, but they are so crucial. There's been a lot of good work done. And the National Recreation and Parks Association has done work on civic engagement, meaning treatment of public spaces in people's communities affects whether they go and vote. I mean, it is so psychologically based. If you feel like your government doesn't care about you, why do you want to be engaged? And so there's just so much good work that's been done. Others have done that as well. But I really just think that those basic tenets, the safety, clean, accessible, I know the word in the question was used was inclusive, and that is a huge wide open door, because inclusive can mean so many different things, but on the basic level, making sure that it's accessible for all, that everybody feels that they can physically enter the space. And then considering basic human needs, comfort needs, so seating of some sort, shelter, thinking about, harsh environments and how to, you don't want to be in a space if you're uncomfortable. So you have to really think about what that aspect is like. And then trying to strive in that provision of adaptable amenities, striving to make it more seamless than obvious. Most of us do not want to be, we want to be provided for, and we want adaptations that help us, but we don't necessarily want to be called out for it. A great example is on a very microscopic level is when we do playground design. We don't put all of the adaptive equipment into one area and say, if you have a physical limitation, you go play over here. Well, all the other kids go play here. If you ask kids, they don't even see those things and they just want to play with their friends. And so I think it's a fantastic lesson that teaches us that we really we all want to be together on the same level and on the same. And so, instead of having something like, the blue sign with the wheelchair on it, and those people sit over there, just learning to blend that seamlessly into our public spaces so that everybody can commingle with everybody without being. So that's what I would add to that question.
Thank you for that. Yeah, safety is super important. I wonder if you might elaborate a little bit more on like how you help a space feel more safe specifically and actually be more safe. And I know a lot of that can come down to like the accessibility and eyes on the street. Actually, like a little bit of a tangent here. I went for a bicycle ride on the Legacy Trail yesterday on my lunch break, and I had a couple of pit stops along the way because I've been working on mapping out the water fountains. And two of the parks that I went to go inventory to see if there was a water fountain, I couldn't even get to because of lack of access. That's a little bit of a tangent, but I wonder if you mind to talk a little bit about maybe like a couple of things that make a park safe for anybody who's there.
Sure. So, again, safety, visual safety is probably the number one thing. Do you feel like you can enter the space and be in the space? And as you alluded to, there are some eyes, whether it be the fronts of homes. That's one of the things that I have been working with the Division of Planning on is if we're developing new public spaces, making sure that they are front loaded on the road. We have a lot of parks in Lexington that are behind the homes. They're hidden, behind the homes, and there's one little access, and that feels just sort of uncomfortable to walk in a 10-foot wide strip between two homes, not quite sure what you're going to find, because you can't see what is going to happen when you get to the park. So we're trying to really improve that. So I think visual openness, and that can go also, that's daytime, thinking about daytime and nighttime. So that's lighting, that becomes lighting. That is always a really hard question in Lexington. when is lighting appropriate and when is it maybe not? Some neighborhoods, we really leave that to be a community decision and a neighborhood decision. If we're talking about adding security lighting, some neighborhoods welcome it. But if we light up the amenities, we can't rightfully say then the park is closed at night. So if you want your park to kind of be closed at night and be a space that's primarily day use, we really, there's a difference. We can do some security lighting as you would have street lighting, very basic, or we can do lighting of amenities. So ball fields or walking paths or, whatever. So lighting, I think, is key as part of that visual openness. And I might stop there. I don't know if you want me to keep going or.
Sure. Sam, I see you want to jump in. Before that, Valerie, who's doing Q&A and has coordinated this, I wonder if you mind to drop some information to the open space and continuity ZOTA proposals for folks on the call who might be interested. Sam, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think one interesting discussion that I'm waiting to see play out is kind of this latest controversy downtown about people kind of, I want to say, congregating in the parking lots. And I think what's difficult about that, and to Michelle's point, is, we provide these spaces during the day for people to congregate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that come dusk, everyone is done being together. Particularly as we get into the fall and winter months. So, how do you provide these lit spaces, or, why is it bad to hang out in a parking lot downtown that's adjacent to the other spaces that we occupy, like Courthouse Plaza? I don't know. I'm just, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I know that there some unsafe things that have come about from that, but it's also a great way for people to socially distance during COVID and interact with each other.
So Sam, can we keep it with you on this one? That leads really well into the next question that I have, which is about placemaking and placekeeping during the pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of commercial areas get exceptions to be able to use the space between their buildings. Like I think of the Burl and the Distillery District as a great example of that, where they've been able to use their patio as an outdoor stage and then host a lot of people in a safer outdoor ways. Especially now as the numbers are just going crazy. Like the Delta variant is way more contagious. When I checked last, we were approaching 4 times the CDC recommendations for vaccinated and unvaccinated people masking up. So we're going to have to continue evolving to reality at any point in our short human lives. So what have you seen as far as placemaking and placekeeping as a response to the pandemic? And can you even see silver linings in that perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure Michelle can back me up on this, but just our use of our outdoor spaces, our parks, our natural areas has just skyrocketed. And I think what's interesting too, I know, at least for my family, is we started just kind of coming and walking around downtown and hanging out at Henry Clay Estates. And then while I was out there, I realized that they have a really great tour that Ashley Smith from Black Soil runs on the history of slavery at Ashland Estate. So it's like these interesting layers of, once you occupy a space and maybe it's not the usual space that you're in, you start to think well, why is this place the way it is? And so I think, kind of going back to your last question about how do you invite people into place kept spaces, I think a lot of that has to do with education and understanding that there are layers and layers of history to a place. Cheapside Plaza is a great example of that. We now call it Henry A. Tandy Centennial Memorial Park, I think. And acknowledging that place has a very layered and troubling history, but that we also use it for different spaces now, that we use it for, for our farmers market and a gathering space for 4th of July events. So just so that you understand the spaces that you're occupying more, I think is really important. I went off on a bit of a tangent on that one, sorry.
Tangents can be very good. That's why there are whole calculus courses on it, right? Yeah. Does anybody else want to jump in on that one before I continue to the next question?
Yeah, I'll just chime in, and like Michelle and Sam mentioned, I think the pandemic it showed the importance of outdoor space, public space, and just how auto-centric our designs usually are in our neighborhoods. You know, everything's designed around the private automobile. And so once that stops, once folks can't get to the gym, they realize, oh, parks are great. How do we get to the park? It'd be nice if we could walk or ride our bike to the park. And so all that blends itself to kind of reimagining and rethinking how we move forward with our designs. And hopefully it gives people a better sense of community and what it really means for public life.
Absolutely. Michelle, I want to encourage you to plug the Parks Master Plan. I'm a geographer by background, and I love that map that shows who has access to parks and who does not in Lexington. I think that's in that plan.
Yeah, there is a lot of information. There's a great executive summary on the Parks and Recreation webpage of the Urban County Government. But if you want to take a deeper dive, I think there's 600 pages of data and surveys and whatever. There's more information. That was a fantastic effort. I have been through 3 master plans with the Division of Parks and Recreation, and I think the last one was my favorite. We had engagement on so many different levels. We were, I guess, fortunate that it occurred in 2018 so that we were not dealing with the pandemic. But nonetheless, we still had an incredibly varied way of pulse checking the community to see where they were with open space and what they wanted. We had town hall meetings in 4 different kind of compass rose locations in the county. And then we also had, at all of our events, we had folks walking around with iPads with a survey saying, can I ask you 3 questions? Can I ask you 10 questions? We had paper survey, we had online survey, we had just a lot of different. Then we had, I think it was 21 or 22 activity focused small group input sessions. So we had anyone involved we could think of in natural areas, and we invited them all to a meeting and sat around and talked about what all their needs were. And we had one for organized sports, and then we had one for just everything you can imagine, golf and aquatics, and there's an aquatics master plan as well that was done. But the master plan really did a phenomenal job of capturing what the community's thoughts were, at that time. And we are still in 2021, we are still working on all of the high priorities that were listed in there, challenging with funding, challenging with just time, rolling everything out, and doing it in a sensitive way, as this whole group has kind of been alluding to, that, we could very easily, as we get funded, just run in and make the changes and leave. I mean, we could just, treat it like a to-do list, but it's that what makes it a meaningful for the community is that we take the time that we've all been saying, we take the time and listen and really make it place making or keeping, instead of just checking the box and getting these improvements done. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was also, regarding the aquatics master plan, I was excited to see that the upcoming plans for the Shillito Park location to become a regional center is going to include keeping that 50-meter lap pool that I super love. So that's great. That's a good example, I think, of like listening to people and continuing to move it forward. Also, quick shameless plug as far as natural spaces for Raven Run. I think a lot of people don't know about Raven Run, and it is an amazing natural resource with great trails within our county. I think it's like a 20-minute drive from downtown. And if anybody from Lextran is on the call, I keep plugging, I think it'd be great if we could get a bus route there that goes maybe once on a weekend or something to get people there that don't necessarily have vehicles. Sam, I think you were going to hop in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that we've talked a lot about kind of our green spaces or our parks as place kept and place made spaces. But I also want to touch on, I think Josh had maybe mentioned, the Southland Drive area. I also think a lot about place kept spaces like Alexandria Drive, and, the number of Latin owned small businesses that are along there, but I mean, best place to go for a burrito and the Mexican bakery that's there, as well as, new place made spaces like the Gray Line station. So it doesn't always have to be, a park space. It can definitely be a space that people occupy and go to. And I want to say in some ways think of as, their piece of community, but that they welcome other people into. So, come and have, come and try a concha or whatever at the bakery, or, come down to Gray Line station. And those are some other examples that aren't just, outside.
Tres Leches. I love Tres Leches. So we're almost out of time. This hour always goes so quickly. I want to ask a quick question about tactical urbanism. So specifically like low cost temporary structures and what role they can have in the placemaking and placekeeping realm as an approach to attempt something without investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in that. I don't know if Sam, you want to stay with that one, or Josh, I don't know if you want to hop in on that one. I see you're unmuted.
Well, and actually, I was going to piggyback off of what Sam had just said
please.
Quickly. And sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it. That's great.
I think that we have an opportunity with the Palmer Pharmacy building, and I would just hate to see our community lose that. So sort of like what she was saying, these can't just be community gatherings and senses of community for communities that look like us. They have to be communities that look like everyone in our community. So just something to always be cautious of, and that, if you see a group of folks that look like you and you see that as a thriving community, if you see a group of folks that don't necessarily look like you, that's not a time to call law enforcement. Or this has to be for all of us to be successful. So certainly I guess to answer your question though, I mean, those sort of smaller scale entrepreneurial spaces, I think are huge. I mean, I'm sure Ryan will touch on it, and I talk to his dad often about places like Finley Market and whatnot. And so Julietta Market here in town, and obviously the buy-in from the community and the ability to support your family and to, grow as a person and as a business, I think is a huge step forward. So yeah.
Yeah, that Julietta Market in the Gray Line station, I think is a really interesting example, because before that, and COVID kind of got weird with things. I mean, it's just weird, but there was the night market, and that was a hugely popular event, which I think was like a pretty low cost temporary structure that went out, what was it, like once a month or so during the warm months, perhaps. And now we have this like great market indoors. Sam, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think tactical urbanism is a really great way to just shine a lens on the way we use our spaces. So for the past few years before COVID, the American Society of Landscape Architects, the local chapter, would hold parking day once a year. And so that is taking over, different groups volunteer to take over a parking space downtown and make it into what we call a mini parklet. And so it just goes to show like how much more activated a street can feel if people are using it, how much we don't necessarily need every parking space that we have. I think COVID has also shined that light, like you were saying, Lauren, in terms of how a lot of restaurants have taken over those spaces, and did we really need them in the first place? Like that area that Mirror Twin has created between its two buildings, like, does that ever need to go back to a parking lot? I don't really think so. It's great the way it's working.
I'd love to get some bicycle racks there though.
Yeah. But so I think that those are really great ways. Another kind of very low cost, low key way that people take over that I love is community gardens. Especially in areas where you have a lot of vacant land, or in some cases greenways, just, I'm not saying I took off my government hat, but just sort of take that space over or occupy it, make it your own, and use it. We have these spaces that are underutilized, and lots of people that don't have yards or places of their own. So
Absolutely. All right, we're almost at the end, and we're quickly running out of time. So for our final question, I would love it if each of you could give a short piece of advice or a tip for someone or a group that is seeking to place make or place keep. I don't know if anybody specifically wants to start us off on that one, or I can just start somewhere. Ryan, would you like to start? Tips for placemaking and placekeeping.
Yeah, so I'm probably a little biased in terms of the engagement aspect of it, but empower your local residents. Again, I can't stress that enough. If once we start doing these neighborhood plans, especially now, one of the things I like to do is start to put names of folks from the neighborhood into the plan, as far as if they can head up a committee or something like that, because now it makes it feel more real to them. And so it's not just the consultant coming in and saying, hey, you all should do this. It's literally calling them out and putting some of the onus on them. But they like that. They like feeling empowered and feeling like they have a stake in the game, some skin in the game. And so you have to learn how to empower the residents and continuously listen. Don't shut out the people who are vocal and against the project. Talk to them, make it a point to meet with them to figure out why are you against the project, and how do I get you to be a part and supporter of what we're trying to do. And so the biggest naysayers can also be the biggest supporters if you listen and get them engaged early and often.
That's great advice. Sam, on to you.
Yeah, same thing. I'm gonna make a shameless plug for the public engagement toolkit that the Division of Planning just put out. And yeah, I think it's all about listening. And we're the Division of Planning is about to go into our next comprehensive plan overview that we have to do every 5 years. We ask for a lot of engagement, and so if we don't hear from neighborhoods, then we don't know what the issues are. So yeah, same thing. I know that people get kind of inundated with lots of surveys for aquatics master plans and park master plans and neighborhood master plans and all this stuff, survey. But like, those are really helpful for us. They only take 5 minutes. Just fill them out, and that really is how we get the support to say, like, hey, this number of people that answered this survey, this percentage of people really want this thing. And so that's how we make or keep spaces that are important, instead of just complaining afterwards that something didn't get done or something didn't happen or something was taken out that you really loved.
Thank you. Josh, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I would agree with what they've said, and to ask questions and to genuinely listen to the answers would have been my initial response. Ryan said something earlier that caught my attention, though, is to just observe. There are things that folks may not be able to articulate how they use the tennis courts or whatnot. But if you go and observe, you will see how areas are used and what is important to people and how they devote their time and energy. Touching on something Sam said as well is that I would also encourage everyone to be involved. And I got a feeling from a planning perspective, you guys typically only hear the naysayers, and that's the most vocal voice in the room, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So that may not represent the whole, though. And so, I would encourage everybody to be involved and to even speak in support of projects and things as we move forward, so that all perspectives are being heard.
All right, we're running up on the hour. Michelle, can you wrap us up with any final quick tips?
Well, I have a lot that I wanted to jump in on tactical urbanism. I would just encourage people not to be discouraged by the capital cost of something, and utilize that temporary, and really try to enact your vision that way. And then my plug will be that in Lexington, the Urban County Council right now has a survey out that you can fill out. There is an opportunity right now for $120 million of American Rescue Plan funds that they are asking the community, how should we spend this? And so everybody in the community needs to fill that out. I Googled Lexington Council survey and I found it. It takes a very short amount of time, but it allows your voice to be heard.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for plugging that survey. And I would encourage anybody to submit multiple proposals as well, because the more proposals for great ideas we have, the more likely they are to be realized. All right, well, that's pretty much a wrap. It always goes so quickly. This is a good time if you're watching to click on all of the links that Valerie's been dropping into the chat. Tons of useful resources in there. We've heard great things about placemaking and placekeeping, about maintaining and evolving the community together, about how this can occur indoors and outdoors and everywhere in between, and even some silver linings of challenging times. I personally believe that humans evolve better when we're a little pressed. So if you think of a question after this that you want to follow up with, feel free to reach out to Lexington Planning or any of the panelists here. A reminder, if you're seeking AICP credits, this session is eligible. And you can watch this webinar again or share it with somebody by visiting our website at imaginelexington.com in the Uncommon Commons section, or check it out on Lex TV on Saturday at 1 p.m. Special gratitude towards all of our panelists, Michelle Kosieniak, Ryan Holmes, Josh Fain, and Sam Castro. Big special thanks to Valerie Friedman, who is double doing duty because she had just coordinated this panel that has been excellent and is doing the Q&A and live chat support. And special thanks to Libby Jefferson, who is always there in a pinch to help us figure out why volume isn't working so we can continue. And a big thanks to Lex TV for supporting us in keeping this on TV and even streaming it live. We really appreciate it. The Mornings with Planning webinar series will continue to discuss new ways to reconnect, reimagine, and respond in a new reality. And we want to hear from you. What topics should we discuss as we move Lexington forward together? You can email us at imagine@lexingtonky.gov to let us know. And we will be back on the first Wednesday of next month, September 1st, where we will be discussing Lexington history. For more information on future sessions, to access the recording from this webinar, and to learn more about planning in Lexington, visit imaginelexington.com or lexingtonky.gov/planning and follow us on social media. Thank you for spending your morning with us, everybody. Cheers. Coffee.